Welcome to Power Up, the podcast that uncovers the unique challenges women leaders face today. Join your hosts, Nat and Kristen, as we dive into the tough topics and provide actionable insights you can apply right now. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes.
When was the last time you felt like someone was really listening to you while you were talking?
Well, I live in a house with 2 teenagers, so definitely not there. And then bless Kyle, who does so much for Powrsuit. He picked me up from the airport on Saturday. And
At what, like 5 a.m. or something? You left so early.
No, it was 9:40.
Okay.
And he was like, so how was it? So of course I was telling him all about it. And then I kept glancing over and he just didn't look like he was really listening. So I asked him about it twice. Are you listening?
Did that help?
Well, no, because it's the wrong question, because what's he going to say? Like, of course he said yes.
Oh, see, sometimes I'm actually like, no, sorry, I wasn't listening.
Of course he
so
said
today's topic
yes.
is about active listening, and it was coined by psychologists Carl Rogers and Richard Farson in the 1950s. And they highlighted the importance of listening with empathy and understanding. And it was a technique that was initially used in therapy sessions, but quickly made its way into leadership and business, as a lot of things do. I like to think about it as jumping into research mode, becoming an expert on the things someone's talking about, which is, to me, a really simple framing of the approach or the mindset you should enter the conversation in. How do you think about it? What's your definition?
Yeah, I guess I like this concept of it is listening over hearing. And I think there is a big difference. So hearing is what I felt like sometimes what my children do, which is the physical and passive process of like hearing what mom is saying and what I'm asking them to do. And then invariably they don't do what I ask them to do, which means they were hearing it. Whereas active listening requires actually a little bit more focus and a mental process where you are understanding and interpreting what that person, in this case, mum, is saying.
Sounds like Kristen's had a really chill weekend where she has felt really heard. Well, yeah, and I think that hearing thing, because you can hear, like the vibrations in your eardrums work and you can hear, but if the information isn't being absorbed, which I think we've talked about this before, because active listening is more of an internal activity. You know, we often see the external signs and we can go through them about, you know, nodding and eye contact and stuff, but it's actually about that internal process and being really actively focused on what someone's saying. So we're going to cover today, why is it challenging? Why should we bother doing it? What makes it important? And then some, as per, practical tips on how to do it and all the different elements of active listening. But it's probably something, if you really pay attention, is not something many of us practice often. And we know this because in our pilot program, and actually now with our members, we often create opportunities for active listening. And we tend to find 2 things afterwards, and we cover them off in our newsletter too. Firstly, that the people who are doing the listening find it incredibly hard. Like they're fighting the urge to jump in with an opinion or a thought or something you were going to say 5 minutes ago is incredibly difficult, and that probably should be a good reminder of how little we do it. But then secondly, for the person talking, we've often found it's quite an emotional response, that they have this real realization that it has been a long time since someone truly listened to them, which is pretty heartbreaking, really, when you think, you know, we're living in this digital age. Where's the connection if we're not really listening?
Yeah, well, you definitely touched on one of the challenges, and that was our own thoughts. Like we're often, when we're hearing something, we're planning our response, and sometimes that can be quite automated in terms of responding to someone, depending on your relationship with them and comfort levels with them. If it's someone you know really well, and often even family members, it's just kind of automated, yeah response. And so that can be a challenge in listening, is that we are already planning our own response, which is often that defensive mechanism. But the other challenge is distraction. Like it is really easy to get distracted with other things, noise outside of the conversation that you're in, be it visual or auditory. What is that?
Auditory?
Auditory?
I think so.
Is that the word?
I think so. I mean, we're not good at words, so
we'll go with that. Yeah, and our brains are wired to jump around and to one thing to another. And while people are telling us stories, it's really easy to get thinking about what we're going to do later on, or nutting out this problem or challenge that we're currently having, or worrying about something. A study from the University of California found that it takes on average, it takes us 25 minutes to return to the original task once we've been distracted. And in the office, we're interrupted every 11 minutes. And so I think that goes to show, number one, how distraction is completely normalized and accepted. And number two, how difficult it is for us to return to be genuinely focused on something.
Yeah.
And one only needs to watch kids nowadays on screens and all of the flipping of scrolling and everything, and how brains are operating so quickly, very hard to focus.
Well, and whether or not I think brains, maybe we're operating quickly, but our ability to focus has diminished. We all sit there watching TV while scrolling, while chatting, and so we haven't actually practiced the discipline. We've fallen out of the habit of practicing the discipline of staying focused. And one of the things we do at home, Kyla and I both work from home a lot, and we were sharing the same room for a while. And what I tend to find, and this is sort of, if you want people to actively listen to you, a tactic you can employ, is you need to find time where someone else has the space to listen, because if both of us are working and she's thinking about one thing and I'm thinking about something else completely, and she shares that thing with me, or vice versa, you are creating a setup to fail, because the other person is so entrenched in whatever else they're doing. They have to come out of it and switch over to what you're doing, and they just won't. So you sort of end up having these really half fake conversations where someone's saying something and the other person's like, I would do anything to get out of this conversation because I've actually got this totally other thing loaded up in my head at the moment. So I think one of the things that we should expect is that active listening is not going to happen all the time. But if you want someone to really listen, it is worth creating the space for it. So it is, can I have 5 minutes of your time? When is a good time for you? Can I book a meeting a week out to make sure you got the space? Here's what I would like to talk to you about, and just make sure that other person is in a situation, because I think otherwise, you kind of make it impossible to get heard as well properly.
Outside of the workplace, I'm a huge fan of driving and actually having conversations while driving, but also moving, like out for walks and stuff. I find those movement when you're kind of on autopilot with either walking or driving fabulous times for listening. And in fact, meetings can be walk and talk as well. Those can be great times to actually just go and connect with someone in the workplace as well during a walking meeting and really listen. Bad habits, which probably can hurt the concept of active listening and the feelings of the other person, is that our brains are quite quick. And I would say that, Nat, your and my brains are quite quick. We have a habit of cutting each other off.
Extroverts, so we jump in.
And jumping in and cutting others off too. Like, we've got a habit of that. So I would say, that's quite a tricky thing too, when you actually kind of maybe sometimes know or assume you know what the person's gonna say.
Yeah.
That's so hard.
Well, it's a tricky one, because I just don't think this is something that we need to do all the time, because in many cases, conversations, the joy of conversations is that they flow and they go down tangents. That's some of my favorites. However, when you are problem solving or dealing with conflict or really trying to get to the bottom of something, it is actually important to really listen. So maybe that brings us to why we should bother. But some of the reasons why it's very, very important, in my opinion, is, in my history of my work anyway, is you actually get to the truth. Like, all these assumptions, we often talk about assumptions. All of our businesses, together and apart, have been built on this idea, cut through the assumptions. Like, our brains create so many shortcuts. So we have to do it because we are faced with so much information throughout the day from everything we see. They often talk about those things of, you put people in a basketball game and they don't spot the gorilla walking through. Our brains are designed to take shortcuts. So what we tend to do is, like, if you're doing research about a new product or thinking about customers or getting feedback, we can do things that really discourage that by not actively listening. So we can say to someone, how did I do? Was it good? They're not going to say, no, it was terrible. They're going to go, yeah, it was good. So we've immediately set ourselves up to not hear what someone's saying. Whereas if we go in and say, how did I do? I'd really like to hear about X, Y, and Z. And then when they respond, you're thinking, I really want to hear your thoughts. It's nothing to do with me. This is not a criticism. This is not about me. This is about me really wanting to understand what they're saying and what their experience of something's been. You unearth so much more information about issues with the things, with dynamics between people, with challenges people are facing. And it's such a powerful tool when employed that I have used it so much in interviews and in research, and we're using it now when we talk to people who are part of the Powrsuit community, of just spending 15 minutes just really trying to become the expert at what their career looks like right now.
And I think the other reason why that I was thinking about is women do genuinely build relationships and trust off of communicating. So that is listening and being heard. And when they're heard, they feel validated. So much research to back this up. And so whereas men often use communication as a way to convey information, so often with that more authoritative leadership style, they're not necessarily expecting people to respond. Therefore, that muscle isn't necessarily as important historically and has, as studies have shown. So when women feel listened to, they feel valued, they feel worthy, they feel engaged, and therefore all of these great stats. And for men, of course, as well, with respect to engagement of your team, of your people, all that great stuff as it relates to people feeling valued and engaged happens when you can practice that as a leader.
I love it. And I think the final one for me is conflict. I just think, like, again, we're writing about this in the newsletter, but conflict is largely caused by poor communication and the stories we tell ourselves. And one of the big pointers, you know, when someone will be like, oh, they were such a meanie to me, or they said this, one of the greatest active listening tips is to be like, what were their specific words? And really working with someone to understand what actually happened versus the story they're telling themselves. But if you're in a conflict situation, and I talked to a Powrsuiter about this a while ago, it was escalating. She was in this thing that had been lasting like a year. There was like quite a lot of tension. It felt like it was going to be incredibly hard to resolve. And I set her the challenge of active listening. I said, set up a meeting with this guy and go in, and your job is to become an expert at his side of the argument. I want you to know exactly what he thinks the problem is and what you've done wrong and what's wrong with the situation. And I don't want you to defend yourself. It's not about you. It's about really becoming the expert at his side. And it was hilarious because I knew what was going to happen. She was going to go in. She came out and she did exactly this. She came out and she was like, so turns out he was worried about these three things, which were completely reasonable things to worry about. We had a great chat about how we could work together to solve those things. He wanted to listen to my concerns, so we talked about them, and now they have this incredibly valuable, functional, working relationship because she put her side of the story away and just didn't care about it and went in to become the expert at his side. And so I just think when it comes to conflict, de-escalate it, get to the cause of it, find out it's often stupid little things that get carried out of control or the stories that evolve. And this is such a shortcut to some of those challenges we face with different dynamics.
Love that. Can you think of any famous active listeners?
Oprah.
Yeah, she was a good listener. In fact, she built $1 billion business off of being a listener.
Yeah.
Was she one of the first talk show hosts?
I actually don't know. I presume, well, she's the one who made it.
The OG, yeah. As a black woman, imagine that.
I know, she's crazy.
Yeah.
Like, just how much she's achieved. But I also think if you watch Oprah's interviews and study them, you'll see her active listening in progress because she never sticks to a script. And I always pay attention to this now. When people are truly have nailed the art of interviewing, they're active listening because they are paying attention to what they're hearing, really listening to the threads that are interesting and then following up on them, and have let go of any like, oh, I need to ask this next or worrying about that. They're just going with the conversation and really trying to learn what the other person's saying.
Yeah, and I'd say that's Stephen Bartlett, and I love his...
Is he the...
He's Diary of a CEO, and I don't listen to the full episodes, but because of my algorithm on Reels, I get so many Reels of him, I get to watch the best bits of all of his interviews, podcasts, and he is amazing.
Classic attention span, eh? Now we're like, we don't listen to the full podcast, we just watch a few Reels.
I get the highlights. Because I have to listen to like crime and or survival podcasts when I'm out walking. So whereas I get his...
I hear you. I'm on the crime survival.
I know. But then the other one I like is Mr. Rogers. I remember growing up with Mr. Rogers. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood.
I hear about him. Who is he? What is he doing? People love this guy.
It's so funny when you actually think about it. You're like, this could be really creepy if I were to describe it. This guy in this cardigan, he lives in this fake world playhouse, and it's all about engaging with kids. And he was an OG when it came to diversity and inclusion and neurological differences and, marginalized communities and just all walks of life on his show. I loved it. Not only in the children, but the other actors, like the postman down the street. And he is great in that he got down on the children's level, which is part of active listening. You are really empathizing with where that person's coming from. And then you're getting curious. And it's just a fabulous children's show. Looking back now, maybe sounds a bit creepy, but I think
it kind of does, but I know it's not. Like, no one talks about it like it was, but everything about it sounds like it should have been.
Yeah. No, he's cool. Well, amazing. Let's jump into practical tips. Do you want to start with number 1?
Yeah. Can I start with a disclaimer that you can't fake these? I think people can quickly think, oh, I can just nod and smile. And honestly, it's almost more transparent that you're not listening then, because, and there's all these little speaking tics we have, and we both do this one as well, where we interrupt someone halfway through with a yeah, and it seems like we're trying to support them, but I feel like we're actually trying to rush them. Like, they're getting the sense we're rushing them along. And so I think there's that. And then like the nodding and smiling, but you're kind of glazed over. Like, you actually, all those like, oh, great, that sounds really interesting. People can pick that a mile away. Like, we all know that. So you cannot fake these things. You actually have to put the active into listening in order to really pull this off.
Agreed. And the optimistic bent of that is these can be learned. So as we go through these 6 steps or tips, they can all be learned.
Okay, so the first one is go into research mode. Become an expert at what they're saying. And the way I do this is get into that mindset before, where I recognize it's not about me. It's about learning as much as possible about them. So the tip here is to replace opinions with questions. You should set a goal, and like, this can be done in 5 minutes. Like, these are 5-minute, 10-minute conversations. You would be amazed at how few times you don't share an opinion in a 5-minute conversation. Replace those opinions. Make a point of not sharing any thoughts, opinions, perspectives of your own, and instead spend that whole time asking questions about whatever this person's saying.
The second tip, and it adds on quite nicely to that, is be aware of your own emotional reaction to what is being said. Because if you're getting really curious, you should be overriding those feelings of maybe defensiveness. For example, if you've asked for feedback, or if you're listening to someone who's got an issue in which you might be involved, this is the time to override those emotional reactions of defensiveness or boredom. If you're listening to your child or your teenager tell you about their dream last night, oh my goodness, you just have to listen. Like, I swear, those are some of the most boring stories. I had a really weird dream last night. You're like, oh, here we go.
You're like, kill me now.
No, I have to stop what I'm doing and turn and face you and actually listen to this dream, which has no bearing on my life. But anyway, yeah. So override rushing, defensiveness, and boredom. That was tip number 2.
I like that. And I think, again, with that one, that's where you can say to someone, I don't have the capacity right now. Can we talk about this in an hour? And then I'll be able to actually listen. And I've heard it with kids too. Well, sometimes with kids, people, because they're always talking, you end up never listening. Whereas if you just set yourself a challenge of 1 5-minute story a day or a week, just really listen to that, and they will pay you back in dividends. I've seen it, like when parents, I've seen a lot of parents who really do that, and it's like super cool to watch. Convey that you are actively listening. And this is a really simple one. This is all the stuff that you do when you really are listening. You're looking people in the eye, you are nodding along with points, you might make those utterances of like, huh, or something along the way, you're leaning in, you are doing all the things that indicate that you are interested in what they're saying.
Yep. Number 4, avoid thinking about what you're going to say. This is going to be so automated to do this, because that is, I suppose, how we're socialized to respond to someone, isn't it? To have the right answer, or to give advice, or to inject our opinion for the most part. So avoid thinking, letting your brain stray to, oh, I need to say this point. Oh, I'm going to say this. Just listen.
I also like the regularly checking your understanding. So this is such an easy one of what I'm hearing is, or it sounds like you're saying this. And I love this because the number of times, and my girlfriend's very good at this, I'll be like, what I think you're saying is this. And she's like, no, I'm not. And that's super useful because you're now giving them a baseline for like, because words are so limited. Our language is poor. Like we have very basic sets of words to explain very vast arrays of scenarios. So it's such an easy way to put it in your own words, and they will be able to clarify any points that may or may not be right, which is, again, super, super helpful for figuring out if you're on the right path or if you actually have become the expert yet.
It's very much open-ended questions,
Yeah.
Letting them expand. And then the final tip we have is to avoid interrupting. This is the one that has caused me the most grief in my life. And especially, I know it used to drive Kyle crazy. I think I have gotten better. But it used to drive him nuts that I've cut him off because I'm like, I know what you're going to say and I'm going to respond now.
You actually do say that. You do say that. I was like, you don't know what I'm going to say.
Well, I say that to you?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I'm like, tell me what I'm going to say.
I know. When I don't feel heard, I do that. But yes, if it's also because I think active listening is also creating space for the other person to respond or to say their bit initially. Yeah. So I know that sometimes if I'm on the defense and I don't feel heard, I've jumped to that. And that's probably what's happened in my relationship with Kai or in those early years. It's like learning how to engage with each other, you know?
Yeah.
And really respecting each other's space to get across what they want to say.
And I wonder if that's actually a really great point because active listening is something you can do on your own. Like you don't need someone else's permission to do it. Like if you decide to embrace that skill, it really doesn't matter what the other person's doing. You can really adopt it. However, it is best practiced when you are new to it in a two-way agreement. So, and like I like your point about defensiveness, because if someone else is feeling on the defensive and the other person's not listening to them, very hard. So if you are wanting to be an active listener, the best thing can be in a scenario where you feel safe and like, you know, but I mean that's a really tricky one because then you go, well, it's something that we can just decide to do as well. I don't know.
I think so. I think as adults, you just have to go, I'm just feeling this. Let's just stop for a minute, collect ourselves, and then give each other space. I think that's a really interesting point and a great challenge.
Yeah, because I wonder if it goes back to that thing about conflict of if someone is really irritating you or you don't feel heard, I wonder if there is an element in there of like just jumping into active listening and seeing if they probably also don't feel heard and they probably also have a story. You know, like we all do that. And so this is, in my opinion, a really great shortcut because you then, if someone's really listening to you, it diffuses it and then you suddenly feel like, now I need to really listen to them and understand their perspective. So you sort of model it.
Yeah.
But anyway, I do think it's true when we're practicing, and we often, like in power sessions, when we first did our pilot, we created an environment where this was the agreed rules, which is a really nice way to practice, to say we had 3 roles in it. One person would tell a story, the other person would actively listen, and the third person would observe. And that was a really nice way of practicing, of training ourselves, because you do 3 minutes each. It was 3 minutes each, wasn't it? So you're only listening for 3 minutes, which feels for the speaker like a long time and for the listener like a short time to start. But the reverse becomes true, that the talker finds they actually have a lot more to share and the listener finds they found it really hard to stay silent. So I think that's a really easy test if you know, before you throw yourself into a full conflict to practice with your team, to say, we're going to try this thing, or I'm just going to listen to you.
Yeah.
Or with someone, you know, you're trying to thrash out a problem or whatever it is. And
if you have an observer, right, your third person.
I mean, I like the idea of an observer.
Yeah, because the observer can kind of say, I loved how you lent in and you listened and you nodded and you asked these open-ended questions. And then speaker, I loved how you described and told a story with that. And we started by calling that the Power Trio, which then evolved to the Power Threesome, and then ultimately, thanks to Nat, ended up with the Power Thruple.
Which is where it forever stayed.
We've landed on that. That's what it is. Okay, I've got a quote today. That is...
Oh my gosh, Kristen's Quote Corner. Wait a second.
Kristen's Quote
Corner.
We've gone over this a few times. Most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. Just recognize that in ourselves, eh? And I think that nicely wraps that up. One invite we maybe want to put out is that we are piloting monthly pricing with our membership network, because we've learned one of the barriers for people investing in themselves is they want to pay monthly. If this is you, reach out at hello@powrsuit.com. It's a limited time pilot. So if you're listening to this, just reach out right now. hello@powrsuit.com. Get information on our monthly pricing membership, and we will add you to this test.
And do it before, if you are coming up to the end of your financial year and you have some professional development budget left, do it before then. Do not leave money on the table, folks. That is free money to invest in yourself. Don't leave it.
Check out powrsuit.com, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye.